Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And yeah, let's just dive right in with some news when it comes to EVE Online. Nothing too specific, but I did read that basically EVE Vegas is going to happen. I personally think that CP is planning to hold off on some bigger announcements for EVE Vegas so that they can maybe share some of that stuff or time some of the dev blogs and things like that with that real life event. The first one, I think, at least the first large one, I would say, in a very long time. So we'll see what comes of that. Could be very interesting. Something I did not expect. We're basically now celebrating the Totality event. So we're celebrating the Triglavians basically coming back into New Eden, capturing 27 systems and then basically making them their own. From what I've read in the dev blog there, they really now have a dedicated player base that is active in Pogven, and that basically furthers the Triglavian agenda. A little bit of like Triglavian lore bits were divulged there as well, that there are sort of rumors that the Triglavians have started some non-aggressive communications with the four empires, and so eventually I do think a lot of us are expecting the Triglavians to become basically the fifth option when it comes to a starting character in EVE Online, which would be, in my opinion, pretty cool, as we could then focus on the big enemy, which or the ancient enemy as it's described there, which is probably like the drifters, the sleepers, the Jovian timed guys that did AI stuff and things like that. So it could be cool. I think lore-wise, they're sort of putting the first little breadcrumbs of potentially more stuff happening. Next thing that I quickly wanted to mention as well, some of you guys may have noticed, in fact, that one of my videos was late last week. I mentioned it in a Sunday recap, but perhaps it's also good that I quickly mentioned it here in EVE Talk. So I changed position within my company, did the first week basically as my new position. I can't really give you guys too many details on that, but I can tell you that I went from like a very operational task to an analyst function, or an analyst function, I think it's actually pronounced, and I was like super tired every single evening of the week there. I basically feel like it's such a different way of working that my brain is rewiring itself as I'm active at work, and so that takes a lot of energy out of me. So I'm committing EVE Talk, absolutely, we're making EVE Talk every week, but if I miss an EVE video where I try to get 2 of them out every week, then you know what's happening. It's gonna be because I'm absolutely crushed at the end of a work day at the moment. Hopefully I can adapt pretty quickly. And yep, that's basically it for the news bit. Let's take a quick look at the New Eden store, which still is keeping the semiotic superluminal skins as new. Then we get some clothing option, couple of bundles, the monocles that are back, couple of unique 750 plex. Doesn't feel completely crazy, although for a monocle, honestly, I personally can't spend the the ISK or the plex on that. But yeah, it's, I think, limited time, so if you absolutely want to have something that'll stand out, then you can consider that. I'm not spotting any sales, and on the services, nothing special to report there either. Yeah, you guys noticed my plex has gone up. That's because I'm partnered with CCP for EVE Online, and so every 3 months I think they give us a little bit of a plex there to do stuff with. We'll see. For now, it's basically an investment for the long-term future for me personally. That means that we get to move on to the market. We are going to start with some plex and stuff coming in at 415. There we go, let's get started. Whoops, I actually wanted to click on plex, and well, you may have seen it from the ticker as well. We're basically started to move sideways, but looking at that 5-day moving average, we're basically creating the highest plateau of the year, just below 2.8 million for the average price. If we then take a quick look, everything has now basically moved to JITA 4.4 again on the tax changes, above 2.8 million for the sellers and up to 2.8 million for the first buyer, but it does open up a little bit after that, so just below 2.8 million for most of these buyers. So we're building in a little bit of hesitation, but it's definitely not a pullback, which, you know, the last couple of times when we reached 2.7 million, the market immediately pulled back on fresh supply or investors that had bought low that decided to take their profits. This time it's a little bit different. We are plateauing here, and we are basically not moving you know, in an immediate correction after reaching a 1-year high point. Potential main reason, I would say, is the economic numbers that we got. While the amount of active ISK in the game, as it's counted in the monthly economic report, has gone down, the ISK sinks have clearly gone up themselves. The major theory is that after the war we've got a lot of players that are basically taking breaks at the moment from their daily EVE Online activities, and that quite a few of those accounts are coming into the non-active part of the calculation. So yeah, a little bit of a pullback, but basically not a big correction, and we are at 1-year high point for Plex. The multiple pilot training certificates, still a little bit all over the place, much smaller market in volume of course, but not willing to break through the 1.4 billion mark, so the 5-day moving average is actually not at a 1-year high point on this one. Almost 1.4 billion for the sellers and 1.34 billion for the buyers. That's definitely a pretty narrow margin. The real question, I think, for next week is, will we also start to move sideways here, or will we get a correction just like we had the last couple of times that we spiked up towards or above, well above 1.3 billion. But I think again some inflationary expectations are starting to be built in on the end of scarcity and on what's happening at the moment is wise in the game. Then we've got these skill extractors that should of course get very close to the Plex chart itself, and here so you can see that 5-day moving average. It pulls back a little bit of course after reaching that 1-year high point of almost 330 million ISK, but it starts to move sideways very quickly. We're not talking the same kinds of pullbacks that we saw before. We are selling at just above 320 million, and look at that, buying at 317 million ISK. That is a very, very narrow margin. Only 4 million ISK on something that costs 300 million. That's like, yeah, what is 1.5% or something like that. Most regular margins that I've been experiencing is like 10% for normal. So this does show that strong demand, and in my opinion, a little bit of expectation that prices are bound to actually go higher on more ISK finding its way into the game. Then the impact on the injectors. This could be bad. I was actually sort of thinking maybe we'll have a pullback. Reason for that, I noticed a couple of posts on the subreddit where some players apparently got like emails from CCP that they could have like a big chunk of tens if not hundreds of millions of skill points for, well, a very high price, basically something that was described as whale hunting. And I think, yeah, that's like directly selling skill points, should put pressure on the need for skill points in the game, but it looks like actually inflation expectations are taking over here as well. The increased price for Plex is basically has to be counted into what's happening for large skill injectors as well, and so we are back at that same high point pretty much that we were just a couple of weeks ago, touching that 680 million mark. 667 for the sellers. Are we going up towards that 680? Yeah, by the end of the page you can see here we are going up to 680, and in JITA it's only basically one seller or couple of sellers that are moving below this. And so you have a couple of that are still sticking around the Tranquility Trading Tower, but I think it's JITA that's dominating, and we get to that 680 pretty quickly. Buyers at 656 million, decently narrow margin here again as well, showing actually a little bit more demand. And then the small scale injector is kind of doing the same thing, although on a delayed way. Basically landed on 140, which is actually the 135 on the chart. We gotta keep remembering that. And sellers are moving up 137 to 140 decently quickly, and buyers 130, 133. So they are putting that pressure as well, just narrowing everything down to the current price range. And from there, yep, it's the same story as with Plex. A little bit of hesitation. Are we bound to go up on inflationary pressures, or do we have a healthy pullback from these relatively high prices? It's up in the air at the moment. And then after that, we've got the daily alpha injector. Very strong performance here, although today's daily average is just above the 45 million range. You can see that 5-day moving average is probably 46, 47-ish. So we're talking 47 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. There is definitely strong demand and interest for these daily alpha injectors, which I think is normal. CCP has put in a lot of effort with the revamped new player experience to get EVE out there. Put it on the Epic Store. Actually, I saw Preach's video, I think it is, about trying EVE Online for like the first 24 hours and then just giving CCP the feedback on what's good, what's not good. Obviously, exploration is still a pain point, you know, something that's very difficult whenever someone has to wrap their heads around the probing mechanic for the first time. That does take a little bit of effort and is very difficult. It's so unique that it's very difficult to actually effectively explain that to a player in game through a tutorial, but once they get it, of course, it becomes something that's like, all right, I know what to do now, and they go further. But that clearly still needs a little bit of work. But overall, yep, CCP has been putting in the effort, I think, which will create a lot of alpha players and thus a lot of demand for the daily alpha injectors that are expensive at the moment, but still it's below 50 million for a daily target. I mean, if you're exploring things like that, it's definitely doable. If you're mining as an alpha clone, that won't be doable. But yeah, with a little bit of risk, especially go explore, find some relic sites or data sites in wormhole space, and you can earn that pretty nicely. Finally, we get the hypercores. Could be an indication on inflation expectation. Again, we are reaching a high point for, let's say, the last 10 months or so, and then we get a little bit of hesitation, but what we're not seeing is a pullback well below 290 all of a sudden. 295,000 for the sellers, 272,000 for the buyers. So overall, still in an expensive place in general. Next up, the mineral market, coming in at 1210. And there we go. As always, we start with titanium. That has broken the pattern, in my opinion, if we're looking at this chart. So the pattern has been that over the last couple of months, after basically the industry changes had been absorbed for the first time by the game, titanium found that new range of around 4.5 ISK, and sometimes we were a little bit above that towards 5 ISK, sometimes a little bit below that towards 4 ISK. But then that's when supply would basically mend that situation and pushes back up and above and back below that 4.5 ISK range. But now here we can clearly see that we're pulling away from the 20-day moving average on the downside. So too much titanium is apparently putting pressure on the price, or too low demand, that's possible as well. We're talking, if we go for GDAP prices, 434, 433 for the sellers, a couple hundred million clearly visible on the front page, and 405 for the buyers. I think they were departing quite a lot. I think 415 was like where they were trying to or were forced to stick around, as sometimes supply would dry up, pushing sellers back above 4.5. But you can see now that that's quite a few millions, if not billions of units that need to be absorbed by the market before that can happen. And could be because of a pretty strong new player push as well, as quite a few players, just like myself actually, do start out with, all right, you know what, mining, it's not the most active and dangerous playstyle, but it has that pretty steady return on time invested, and it helps you to just basically get to know the game and improve your character. Where do they start? In high sec, and thus we get a titanium price crunch at the moment. Let's see if it's confirmed, because we should then see the same in pyrite and in mexalon, and last week we were basically seeing the first signs that that was potentially happening. And so here you can see, although we've stalled with the descent, we are clearly moving now sideways at that lower range that is well below 20 ISK. Before that, sellers could sometimes push their way towards 20 on a couple of occasions. from here, that's a way taller order to ask for, and so sellers are down to 1687 below 17 ISK. That's definitely that pullback that I'm talking about. But now we are reaching, I guess, a new price that the market likes, because 1662 is a much smaller margin. But we have that pullback that was basically also done in the last 2 weeks or so for Pyrite. And then we've got Mexalon, where it's not really visible, but again you can see at the tail end for the last 10 days or so, the 5-day moving average did not manage to go above the 20-day moving average, which here happened and happened here. That was that nice wavy pattern around a price range. Now there is pressure in the Mexalon market as well. 57.92 for the seller, so below 60, and then 54.76 for the buyers. It's a narrow margin, so there is strong demand in my opinion as well. You get a pretty good price compared to the sell price, but I think it's oversupply that's basically causing these high-SiC minerals to go down. And we in fact had like a little bit of a hint that that could be happening, because I think a couple months ago, maybe a little bit over a month ago, we took a look at the mineral prices in Amar as well, and we spotted that they were substantially lower, especially for the high-SiC ones in Jita. So there are regional differences that do exist in the game. Amar has way more mining potential because of way more high-SiC systems than any other empire. That meant even more supplies there and way less demand as well compared to Cheetah, and thus we had lower prices, which would be like a trade potential. But you can also see that such overabundance does, I think, eventually flow over into the other markets, and that's potentially what we're seeing here, and including higher player activity, new player activity perhaps, that's creating more supplies. Then we've got Isogen, there we go, so stepping back towards 70 ISK, actually close to the 1-year high point. A viewer actually mentioned something that I should probably note here, is that Isogen does have a decent amount of supplies in wormhole space as well, in ore anomalies, and not as much for Noxium, so they're seeing that as a sign that while Isogen can probably go higher, it's not the exact same dynamic in being so low-sec dependent for supplies as Noxium itself. Both Noxium and Isogen have resources in Pogven, but honestly Pogven is pretty risky space, and still I personally am holding on to my theory, which here again we're seeing that other step up in price. Let's see where the sellers are at. 69.46, so just below 70 ISK. Buyers forced up to 66.34, and we still have these volumes, 135 million, 77 million, etc. But once we go down below this, it's starting to dry up a little bit. We still have some big batches waiting at 83.50. And then at 100 ISK as well, but I do personally still feel that we are still depleting these stocks, and that basically at the current price Isogen is being consumed more quickly than it is being actively produced in the game at the moment, despite the fact that there are more sources out there. But if it's not high-SiC, I really feel like it's a big step up in commitment, in risk, in effort as well to bring it all to the market, and so that should mean, in my opinion, a bigger premium than just like 10 ISK compared to Mexalon. So I still think that once we, for instance, here go through this 150 million below 70, that will push up to 70, and that then the sellers will start to really have smaller batches available, and will be able to push the price up then to 75 decently quickly, 80 decently quickly, and let's not forget here, we are plateauing in almost the last week or so at the current price, which is very high on this chart. So I still think that Isogen is set for a couple more months at least of higher prices, and that then it's going to depend on Q4 whether or not more of it becomes available at the end of scarcity, which for my theory, I think CCP will not do that. I think CCP will focus on other resources before the Tech 1 minerals. Then we've got the Noxium chart, which is basically still doing its thing. This looks way more, in my opinion, like a chart that's being dictated by active supply demand. Sometimes there's not enough supply and we go to high range of 1250. Then that brings in more supply as players get way more for their effort. That can crash the price down to 1000. But that's where, you know, the market is definitely willing to grab that Noxium. You know, effort starts to dwindle a little bit, so we go back up. At the moment we went back down, and here at the tail end we can actually see us go back up a little bit as well. 1200 ISK for the sellers, almost 1100 ISK for the buyers of Noxium. Still, in all likeliness, the most expensive Tech 1 mineral because it's so dependent on risk, on low-sec stuff, which I think is a place where CCP likes to see these types of minerals. It is basically a reward for low-sec activity. Then we've got Zydrine from Nullsec that looked like it would also go down last week, and that trend of being very flat could be broken. But we can see that we have a very solid recovery right back to the 879, and that we're basically sideways for the last week. All of a sudden 883 for the sellers, 852 for the buyers. I think here basically this shows the power and the organization of Nullsec, because they are the suppliers, they are the ones that also dictate the price through the sell orders. They can very quickly and very effectively just rectify an oversupply situation and maybe even relist everything to the price that they want and then just not budge. I think that's way easier for them to organize, and as a result you've got a much more stable chart that when it looks like it could break down, basically can be reset very quickly, very effectively by an outside party to the JITA markets. Let's see if Megasite has anything similar. Nope, that one is actually still sliding off to the 550. So perhaps here they still need to do a little bit more of cartel formation to make that happen. Below 580 for the sellers and at 550 for the buyers is definitely away from that 600 ISK. Basically the cheapest Megasite we've had in pretty much a year at the moment. We will again see if there is enough willingness in Nullsec there to reset that price towards 600, or if there's basically that much available out there that they're willing to trade in this 550 range. And then finally we've got Morphite that stepped down to below 75,000. They stay there, but a little bit of volatility is starting to show up here again. 66,000 for the sellers, 63 for the buyers. And yeah, I'm actually looking at the chart a little bit wrong. You see bouncing off the 6250. Definitely expensive, something that if you took a look at the monthly report you may have noticed as well, is that the mineral price index has started to come down substantially, and this pullback in Morphite is definitely a big part of that explanation. And you probably know this is a CCP intervention where they made more Morphite sources available in the game, so not Tech 1 related. I think that there could be even more of it coming down the pipeline, but we will of course see what CCP decides on. I have no actual information, this is pure speculation on my part. Next up, the PI market coming in at 2250. Let's take a look at that one. Expectation, well, advanced PI materials, if we do still see that increased activity in general, although we had that pullback in the active ISK, I still also think that it was mentioned in there that Nullsec has gone pretty quiet PvP wise, and that's a sign that everyone is basically hunkering down at home and starting their build-up process, which should be positive for advanced PI materials price wise. And you can see here that we're basically able to stay above 1.75 million for the broadcast nodes. It's almost 1.8 for the sellers and almost 1.8 for the buyers as well, showing in my opinion again that strong demand, which activity doesn't have to be up across the board for this to happen. I think here there's the rebuilding efforts, which attracts a different kind of players than the PvPers or those that are playing EVE Online for the big wars and the huge battles. And so you can have a decrease in one that decreases the active ISK in the game, while you have an increase in the other that increases prices, such as here for instance. I think that's what's happening at the moment. Then we get the construction blocks that tried to move up a little bit, but gets squashed very quickly by supply. Unfortunately for refined, I think it's just so easy to make, and it's been such a bad price for the last couple of years, in fact, that there's so much supply waiting out there that it's going to be a very long time before this can actually break out. 7,550 for the sellers, just below 7,000 for most buyers, as you know, basically still very expensive. 10,000 plus should be the average price on this one. Consumer electronics also did a pullback up from bottom prices, but you can see pressure is mounting. We're back below 6,000, 5,900 for the first seller, 5,600 for the buyers. Coolants had a very impressive spike up to 10,000 disc, but this is in line with my expectation. We do have supplies that is pushing us back down like 10-15% or something like that to 9,000 disc. We're talking 9,250 for the sellers and 9,000 for the first buyer, but getting down to 8,200 very quickly. So tied to fuels, that seems to be a little bit better, but it's the same story. I still have, I think, hundreds of thousands of units of coolants ready in a Mars space at this point. I'm not bringing them in aggressively. I actually tried to sell at those higher prices in batches that were absorbable by the market, but there's just so much out there that you're inevitably going to impact that price, and you're gonna push it back down, which is what's happening right here. Next up, we've got the cryoprotectant solutions. I'm reading this one actually as like a little bit of a speculative jump up in price. You can also see it was not on very big volumes. I think some players basically were then buying below 100,000 disc, kind of taking the gamble that if there's something happening this quarter that we don't know about. It was a gateway quarter where CCP really didn't give us a lot of information, and I would say that potentially like an implant could fill that gap at some point, and so I think that's a little bit of speculation on that. But then those higher prices again attract both supplies and old stocks, and as a result we're back down to 105,000 for the sellers, 95,000 for the buyers. So if you want that gamble, because cryoprotectant solutions is tied to implant production, you can buy it below 100,000 disc once again. Then we get enriched uranium, did a little bit of a jump as well, so tied to fuels, but the pressure is starting to mount, albeit a little bit more slowly than on coolant. 9,000 for the sellers, 8,500 for the buyers. Integrity and response drones, advanced PI materials staying well above 175 million. I think we'll be seeing another narrow margin, 1.8 for the sellers, 1.67 for the buyers, so that's pretty narrow, not as good as the broadcast nodes, but still pretty expensive at the moment. Mechanical parts tied to fuels, another one that went up to almost 8,000 disc and now is getting crushed quickly by supply, back down to 7.2 for the sellers, 6,600 for the buyers. Nanites is tied to implants potentially as well, and I think has an interesting component because it's used in nanite repair paste, which is a consumable. So I'm seeing nanites as a little bit of potentially like a fuel related PI material, because part of what it makes gets consumed by players without necessarily like losing a ship or something like that. And so here we're still seeing super low prices on this one. It's a refined PI material that's selling for less than 5k, buyers coming in at 4,500 disc. Honestly, if you're looking for that gamble investment in PI, this one is like even now 30% less than most of the other refined ones. I try to buy some cheap nanites and hope, of course, that we do see a revalorization of PI at some point. Then we get the nano factories that went to pretty close to 1 year high point of almost 1.1 million, something like that. Will of course also, I think, drive in supply and maybe even all stock, so we get a little bit of pressure, but at the moment we're talking 900,000 for the sellers, 840 for the buyers, and so selling up here is definitely again a high price showing high demand. Organic mortar applicators also pulling back a little bit. Actually the first one where I would say it's pulling back more than expected, 750,000 for the seller, 700,000 for the buyers, and I think the story is right here. You can see that we can't fill the board with buy orders, which means not as strong a demand here for the organic mortar applicators. Recursive computing module seems to be going up, although we still have that annoying data point, but yeah, it's going up towards 125 million, so 125 almost for the sellers, almost 1.2 for the buyers as well. Narrow margin, strong demand yet again in an advanced PI materials. Robotics tied to fuels had that recovery that is getting crushed by supply very quickly, back below 60. 62,000 for the sellers, 59,000 for the buyers. At least we're not right back at the bottom, but it's pretty obvious that there's supplies out there waiting for any opportunity. Self-harmonizing power cores stable above 150, in fact 164 million for the sellers, almost 1.6 for the buyers. Again, I would say strong demand right there. Sterile conduits went again to that close to one-year high point, well above 1.1 million. I think here some supplies were ready to take advantage of that, crashing the price back down. But $1 million for the sellers and $1 million for the buyers. So there's definitely potentially some crashes that can happen, but we're not really willing to like go down to 750,000 or anything like that just yet. So if by next week we're actually bumping back up, I think it confirms the stronger demand after the industry changes. Yukomi superconductors next, actually one that's moving a little bit more average across the year, and it's actually a little bit above average at the moment. 76,000 for the sellers, 71 for the buyers. If there's an item and you can produce it, Yukomi superconductors, you're actually, compared to almost everything else, getting a good price for that. And then finally the wetware mainframes, again edging back to 175 on the chart. 1.7 million for the sellers, 1.7 million pretty much for the buyers. So that does again indicate strong demand for advanced PI materials. The advanced moon materials next, coming in at 30.55. Let's go. As always, we start with the carbides, and so these are raw materials needed in Tech 2 production, and every faction has basically their own set. So we start with crystalline carbonite for Galente production, and I think we're basically seeing the same thing as what we saw last week. We have lost the major volatility around the industry changes and the height of the war, which now we have settled at basically a premium. Start the year at 150 to 175, and now we're moving in a 175 to 200 range at the moment. 190 for the sellers, 177 for the buyers, basically expensive at the high end of its range. Then we've got the Caldari one, that's right here, titanium carbide, that has again lost all of its volatility. April, May, June, war and industry changes really made a mess of all of this, with very expensive prices from time to time. But we're settling down at again a premium, a bit above 150, and we're settling just below 200 isk on the chart. 190 again for the sellers, to 200 very quickly. 180 for the buyers. Then for Minmatar we get Fernite carbide, one big war spike right here. But again, 130 at the start, 160-ish at the end. Yeah, 170 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. So it's the same story here. We're basically paying a bit more for the carbides, but the volatility has left the market. Tungsten carbide, kind of the same thing, although we're much closer to the previous range. Let's see what this is. 165 for there. Yeah, 180 to 170 here for tungsten carbide, with again April bump, then a couple of May, June high points, and then volatility just starts to decrease, but we settle at that higher price range. And then for the meta materials, pretty much a stable story so far, except for a couple of spikes that tend to be absorbed pretty quickly. So let's see if that's confirmed. First of all, Galente's photonic metamaterials. Yep, there we go. 12,500 average price across the board. Couple months below, couple months above, but weathered quite nicely. And then here we get one spike that gets squashed in a matter of like maybe 2 weeks, and we're back at 12,500. So 12,500 for the sellers, 11,500 for the buyers. It's basically the reference price for these photonic metamaterials. Then we've got the Caldari one, non-linear metamaterials. Again, this one is like more of an above 20,000 is where it usually stands. And so we had a couple of months that we were below average, but no like clear 1 year low points or anything like that, or complete trend breaks. And we very quickly recover back. 22,000 for the sellers, 21,000 for most buyers. That's very nice and stable. One spike here in March that again gets absorbed quite quickly, pushing bring us back into the range. And then we've got the plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar. 17.5 at the start, 17.5 at the end. All right, pretty strong performance and another spike in April, a couple here in May, June, but overall 15 to 20k has been the range for plasmonic metamaterials. We're at 19,000 for the sellers, 18 for the buyers, very reasonable. And then we've got the terahertz metamaterials, basically a low start, April spike, but in general 15 to 17.5 is where we're at, 15.5 to 13.7 on a bit of a lack of demand. Definitely quite stable, surprisingly stable if you look at everything else that was happening over the last year, and a little bit more than that, maybe 1.5 to 2 years, with the resource crunch, minerals going crazy, PI cratering, and here we have something that was like really quite stable and still is. Then we get those other advanced moon materials which have been crushed, a little bit like PI, I think, and so that's still kind of the case. From a 1 year low point at 50,000, we get fermionic condensates that went back above 60, but it just can't hold that. So the demand isn't there. 58.5 for the sellers, 57,000 for the buyers. So we're not crashing back to another 1 year low point, but clearly we're trading at below average prices. Ferrogel did just do a pull back up to 35,000. Pressure is starting, 33.5 for the sellers, 31,000 for the buyers. But again, that's a pull up in price from a 1 year low point where we were well below 30,000 discs. So I personally think we'll go back down quite severely. Then we get Fullerites trying to make its way to 750. My normal price perspective above 1,000 is normal for Fullerites. So again, this is really not expensive. 760 for the sellers and 725 for the buyers. Hypersynaptic fibers, again, very much under pressure, kind of flat below 9,000 disc. I think we can go through some of these a little bit more quickly. All right, nanotransistors making its way back in a range that we're more used to, above 4,500 disc, but it's done so over the last couple of days. 5,100 for the sellers, 4.4 for the buyers. Again, by next week, I personally think we'll push back well below 4.5 quickly. Or easily. Then we get the phenolic composites. I think phenolic composites and carbon fibers or ceramic fibers, did have a very good time around the industry changes because they were needed a little bit more. But now pressure is mounting and you can see that we're right back at the range we started a year ago. 1650 for the sellers, 1600 for the buyers. Then a couple of new ones introduced since April. There's not much to say on these until the chart gets a couple of extra months and we see some volatility. So basically super stable for these pressurized oxidizers and carbon fibers. And then ceramic fibers, same thing, right? Start at 300 to 400. Then industry changes get announced and you get this nice plateau at 500 with a spike on the industry changes introduction late April up to 800 disc. But then the summer comes in and we're moving back to that 300 to 400 disc range. 370 for the sellers, 366 for the buyers. A little bit expensive still compared to the start of the year, but definitely nothing close to what was speculated on in April. Then we have the Take-Two ships next. Let's see if we can spot some opportunities coming in at 38 minutes. So for Take-Two, I'm still in the same mode. I love the Take-Two ships for active trading. Unfortunately, I feel like most of the volatility in Take-Two has, left the market. There's a couple of exceptions. I think one of the stealth bombers was doing really well last week, actually swinging up all of a sudden. But in general, what I'm looking for is bargains close to 1 year low points, definitely below the average price. And here you can see the basilisk is not in that place. It's in fact right in the middle of its entire chart, selling for 12 million, buyers coming in at 196 million. You could say you're buying below 200 million, but honestly, if I look at the completed trades, I actually made a trade at that range. So you could, as there is a bit of a gap between sellers and buyers that has opened up, buying below 200 million is not that bad. But honestly, we would of course prefer to see the chart itself go below 200 million. Then you should get a much better buy opportunity. Cerberus is actually a little bit low, but you can see that I'm not the only one that's looking for those bargains. As we hit that low point, volumes coming in and they're pushing the average prices right back to 230. 223 million for the sellers and back above 200 million for the buyers, which again for me is like, yeah, if I want to pick something up now, it would be a Cerberus below 200 million, which last week was probably possible, or just 3-4 days ago, but you know, that gets spotted and that gap is unfortunately filled by demand, as there's a lot of people that are looking for those cheap Take 2 ships, I think. The Guardian, that's a surprise drop off, right? You can see here how for the last 6-7 months or so we were really not willing to break down to that 180 million on the chart, but here all of a sudden it happened. Guardian selling for 174 million, buyers coming in at 160 million, and you can see my trade here is 185 to 200 million. So this is the first one where I'm saying, yep, if you can buy a Guardian close to 160 million ISK right here, then we are looking at that very bottom of the chart. That does make sense. That looks interesting. That is a real bargain that's showing up, at least from the perspective of this chart. Then we get the Hound also. Oh no, actually the Hound is here. Okay, dropping back off below 25 million ISK, but is this a buy opportunity? If I look at this chart, honestly, I think not. 25 for the sellers, 23 for the buyers. Yeah, that's just way too narrow a margin. I'd need to see maybe 20 million or at least below 22 million come into play before I make a move here. The Ichthyorsa for Triglavian stuff staying above 600 million, and oh, I'm actually spitting on my microphone here. 666 million for the sellers and 605 million for the buyers. I mean, it's super expensive, but it is Triglavian, so it has its overpowered probably weapon system that's still happening there as well. A little bit of a pullback from the high point, but still kinda expensive to make. The Ishtar, another one where I'm saying, yeah, this is definitely a trend break, right? You can see how for the last 9 months or so we were not able to get the chart below 200 million ISK. Here we are. It is gonna start to be late for the real bargain hunting. 194 million for the sellers, 186 for the buyers. But I would say if you're buying an Ishtar below 190 million ISK, you are looking at another good buy opportunity. So they are starting to form here. Interesting. Ishtar last week looked interesting. We're starting to slow down, so last week was probably the best place to buy. This week you can still do so. Guardian is starting to look interesting, so that's pretty nice. But then one of my favorite categories is actually stealth bombers, right? 20-30 million range. Very doable investment wise, and sometimes you could go from 20 to 35 million, as you can see here, and here you know, a jump up of 15 million in a matter of just a month or so. That's not happening at the moment. That volatility is gone, and yeah, at the moment we've just slowly edged back towards that 30 million on the chart. 29 for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Yeah, that's just a no. Yeah, no, you don't want to buy, I think, and it's actually not a great price to sell either. Then we've got the Munin slowly, unfortunately, moving back up, actually decently quickly. 223 for the sellers, below 190 still for the buyers. Yeah, unfortunately the volumes are not that great. I think by now, on this dip, on this dip, and on this dip, if you wanted a Munin investment, you will have made it by now. So right now, probably not the best time. Then we get the Nemesis, still staying in that 22.5 to 25 million range. 24 for the sellers, 22 almost for the buyers. That's another no for me. And then we get the Oniros, still flat above 180, actually going back up on the daily averages. 191 for the sellers, 170 for the buyers. Yeah, 170 for the buyer. Now, honestly, I'd wait for a better buy opportunity. The Panther, all right, the battleship. So we're keeping these in here to try and see if there's potentially some lower production prices that are happening. And look at that, that's a pullback well below 1.25 billion, 1.1 for the sellers, 1 billion for the buyers. That to me is an indication that there seems to be some pressure on the prices. Could of course be way more than just production costs, but this does feel like, you know, indeed Take 2 bit of pressure creating some of these buy opportunities. We'll see in a moment if the widow confirms. Here was the first, volatility that we would love to, of course, see more of. Could have bought here for 25 million, could have sold for 30 to 35 million pretty easily. But at the moment, that got crushed very quickly. We're back down to 25 million, 26 for the sellers, 25 for the buyers. And yeah, these buyers need to drop off towards 20 before we jump back in. Then we've got the Scimitar. Went to a bottom price and a slow pull up to 195, so it's probably too late for the bargains. 193 to 181. And now let's see what the widow is doing. Flat below 1.25 billion, at least it's not going up. 1.2 for the sellers, 1.2 for the buyers. And finally the Zealot, that also stays below 200 million, but not willing to go for a 1-year low point or anything like that. 198 to 182. Yeah, a couple of interesting charts there. As I said, Guardian and Ishtar look nice for that bargain. Warning again, don't buy these expecting to make a lot of ISK in the next couple of weeks or so. For me, my expectation would be I'm buying at a bottom price, and hopefully somewhere this year we see some more speculation come back and we see those better prices. But it's a medium to longer term investment now. Next up, Tech 3, but first a quick drink. There we go. So Tech 3 ships coming in at 45.30. And I think for over a month now, I've been expecting a Zwepel increase in price, as the Confessor, the Hecate and the Jackdaw have all commanded way higher prices and were, in my opinion, or should have drawn in a lot of the supplies, but that just hasn't materialized. Let's see, it still felt like it could happen, although the Confessor was pulling back quite severely. You can see that right here, went below 45 million. It's going back up to 45 million, 48 in fact for the sellers and 42 million for the buyers. Supply wise, it's not that much that's being drawn in anymore. So the Confessor still, I think, should draw in a little bit of extra supply, at least compared to the Zwepel. Then we get the Hecate that is starting to go back down towards 50 million. So still a very nice premium. This again should draw in a lot of supply. 51 for the sellers, 48 for the buyers. And you can see half a page in the last 24 hours, more than 100 Hecates. 48 hours, it's the full page. So this is a lot of supply. And all of that effort should really diminish the effort in the Zwepel. Let's see. The Jackdaw staying above 50 as well. All right, let's take a look at the actual prices. 52 million for the sellers, 49 million for the buyers. And yeah, supply-wise, that's another no. That's very surprising. I would have hoped that like half a page here was filled within the last 24 hours or so to take advantage of that 50 plus million for the Jackdaw. Then I would have said that should really mean that Zwepels should be running out basically of supply. But yeah, it's not happening in the Jackdaw despite that amazing price. So let's see what the Zwepel is doing. Still very flat, in fact going down slightly in price. 43 million for the sellers, less than 41 million for the buyers. Demand is non-existent. It's still another week for me where, yeah, if you buy one or two cheap Zwepels close to 40 million and the Confessor keeps drawing in that demand, the Hecate, and then now the Jackdaw. I mean, it's the most expensive Tech 3 that should mean a lot of Jackdaw production, and putting everything towards that. Eventually, I mean, we should see a little bit of demand or a lack of supply start to show up in the Zwepel, but for now, nope, super stable at a massive discount compared to the other three Tech 3 destroyers, which is very surprising to me, because over the last year or so and before, we actually had that very nice interplay. Let's see here, late November, late January and late June, lovely spikes in the Zwepel. And then let's see on the Confessor, so you can see more expensive here, more expensive here. Then we get the Hecate, that volatility, definitely this one as well. And then we've got the Jackdaw, only started to go up here, but definitely went up in price. And then the Zwepel was finally pushed up here as well. Let's take a quick look at January then. Confessor spike in January, Hecate stayed above 50 million in the first half of January most of the time, and then the Jackdaw plateaued at 45 as well, and then the Zwepel actually managed to break out to 55 on like probably massive PvP purchases and things like that. But yeah, you had way more correlation when volatility showed up in some of the more popular ones like the Confessor and the Jackdaw, then the Zwepel would respond after that, and now we're just not seeing that. So we'll see. We still have time to be right, of course, if eventually we start to see the Zwepel above 45 million, which would be, I think, is a nice little trade. Buy for 40, sell for 45, 25% increase would be very nice. Then we get the cruisers. Here is the Legion just settling down above 180, not much to say. Below 180 for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. Not a lot of demand, but honestly it's not a crash in the price either. The Loki staying flat above 190. 193 to 178. Again, not huge demand, but no crashing down of the price. Then the Proteus going back below 180, 172 to 166. Yeah, it is the least popular one, so I would not really gamble too much on that one. And then the Tango had some volatility in the weekly numbers there. You can see it show up now back to 196 for the sellers, and then 180 for the buyers. I'd actually say that this one is decently expensive, and so no gamble slash buy opportunities in the Tech 3 cruisers this week either. It's interesting, I think, that it has more popularity because you no longer lose the skill points on losing a Tech 3 cruiser, but I think it also stabilized things a little bit and basically put a stronger floor on the low prices, and so real very clear buy opportunities will be much harder to spot in that Tech 3 cruiser market. Finally, we move on to the extra product for the week, and I'm choosing the faction cruisers after checking the faction battleships at 51 minutes. Try not to hit the microphone too much. Main reason actually it's progression, but also I bought a Gila to go for another regen Gila, and yeah, it's gonna be interesting because that one felt super expensive. So faction cruisers, we'll start with the pirate faction, and so we get the Ashimu, and yeah, this is obviously what happened in April. The industry changes have hit faction ships very hard. Starts the year at 75 million, currently selling for 150, a 100% increase in price over the last year, and expensive over the last 6 months. The Cinnabal has something very similar and is in fact at a 1-year high point at the moment. Started the year at, this is a 130 million, and here we're at 284 million for the sellers, 261 for the buyers, over double the price, and everything of course starts to ramp up here in April on the industry changes. The Ortrus 1-year high point as well, 500 million ISK for an Ortrus for a cruiser, from 200 to 500 million, more than double yet again. Phantasm, same thing, 1-year high point, started below 100 million ISK. So if you actually take a look at that average price here at the lower end, it's 80 million ISK, and now it's costing 380 million ISK. That's like 3 to 4 times the price. Again, like a super expensive. Stradios coming back down a little bit at the tail end, but from a high point above 400 million for a Stradios. That's crazy. That's really expensive. 370 for the buyers. It is a great ship, right? Covered ups capable. You know, if you want something with a little bit more firepower to roam around wormhole space and perhaps try to catch some smaller explorers, this is a great ship for that, but it's really expensive all of a sudden. Yeah, double the price over the last year. Then the Gila, the one that I bought, started actually at enough volatility being so popular, and started the year at 170 and is currently costing 365 million, 350 for the buyers, again coming down from another 1-year high point. And then finally the Vigilant, also just jumping up to 400 million, is doubling in price over the last year. Pirate faction ships, they just are more expensive to make and thus have doubled in price. Navy factions, let's take a look at these. Stormbringer from 100 million at the start of the year, went up to 200 pretty quickly, but here again, late April, May spike, June spike, and at the moment 400 million. For the sellers of Stormbringers, Ogre Navy issue, look at that April volatility. That's down a little bit, and I think that these should have like a more winning out, cheaper LP, cheaper versions. That should happen, but in general, yeah, actually no, that's a big shift. 60 million for the sellers, 52 for the buyers. That's way more, way cheaper. Then we get the Caracal Navy issue that's actually below the chart at the moment. Started at 75, goes up to 130, but is currently only costing 80 million to 68 for the buyers. Interesting, because Caracal Navy issue is actually a pretty interesting and potential, high potential hull, in my opinion. So you've got missiles, you've got shields, and I think you've got 5 small drones, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and you've got 5 small drones. I mean, it's not as buff as a Gila, but considering that it costs like a quarter of a Gila, or even less than that, maybe a fifth, if you're looking for that PvE option for a Caldari ship that's gonna be more performing or better performing than something like just a general Tech 1 cruiser, but you don't want to spend $500 million on getting the very best of a Gila. This is interesting all of a sudden, very big difference. Executor Navy issue going for 65-ish, I'm gonna say, 68 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers. Omen Navy issue 65 as well. All right, across the board, pretty uniform prices, just below 70 million. Osprey Navy issue as well, actually very good hull as well, in my opinion. I think again, drones, can it do missiles? Yeah, heavy missile and light missile bonus, so lots of options on that one. And then the fitting was not bad with 6 medium slots, so you can definitely get a pretty good shield tank on that, 4 low, so you can buff your weapon systems. This is also a cheap option if you're looking for that faction cruiser, for instance for exploration, maybe also for some abyssal stuff. Side fleet issue looks expensive at the moment. Amar Caldari looks cheap. Side fleet issue looks expensive on the chart, but it's still 96, is below 100 million for the sellers. Not a lot of buyers, going down to 70 million, so very big margin on the expensive side fleet issues, and way different in range, of course, from the pirate faction ships. Stabber fleet issue, also Minmatar, so also expensive at the moment, almost 100 million, buyers coming in at 80. And then the Vector Navy issue, also expensive at the moment. So Executor like maybe a little bit less popular, but Vector Navy issue is a very good platform as well, although not really a drone boat anymore, but it still does pack a punch. Can have drones, and yeah, pretty good ship, versatile. So that one is expensive at 92 million and 80 million for the buyers. Definitely a big difference with expensive Galente and Minmatar ships and inexpensive Caldari and Amar ships. So very good, right, in my opinion, if you're looking for that step up in cruiser ship from Tech 1, but you don't want to spend $500 million. Look into, in my opinion, Osprey Navy issue, Omen Navy issue, and Caracal Navy issue. Very affordable at the moment, and actually really pretty strong platforms as well. Although of course Gila will always outperform these, but yeah, maybe they'll get hit by the nerf bat because of that at some point. We will see. So yeah, there you go guys, that will be it for this EVE talk. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and as always, I'll see you next time.